Most preachers will preach the book of Daniel and get to chapter 6, and then they're done. They're like, I'm not sure I want to go any farther. Why is that? Well, the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel is full of cool stories, right? Cool, things of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, Daniel in the lion's den, God's faithfulness and this and that. But from chapter 7 on, it introduces us to the prophetic or the apocalyptic portion of the Bible. And so here's what you're going to find out. If you give me 20 minutes, you're going to understand why people usually stop at chapter 6. Because you're going to be like, what? What is that? What's he doing? What's he talking about? Well, that's just kind of how it is. And so what we want to do is lay down some basic, understanding of some stuff here. And the basic way that we view human history is really 2 ways. You got one of 2 choices. You've got that the future is open, meaning it's uncertain with endless possibilities that anything could happen at any time. All right, some people hold on to that. I will tell you, if you hold on to that one, you will, have a life full of stress and anxiety because you're always going to be worrying what is going to happen. Is this the day that the bottom falls out? Is my world going to unravel? You're just going to have anxiety and you're going to have stress. And the second option is you could look at that the future is closed. And what I mean by that is this: it's controlled by God. That God is in charge and he's working all things for good to his glory, and that God has a destiny and a plan for your life and for history, right? So meaning that God's got a plan for you. And if you believe that, you will sleep better at night, right? Because regardless of what goes on, what you will know is that God is for you and he loves you. And so as we come to the prophetic portion of Scripture, what you need to understand is that when the Bible was written, 25% of the Bible, 1/4 of the Bible, was prophetic at the time it was written. And so as we come to the prophecy in Daniel 7, what you're going to see is this. You remember that old kids song that we used to sing? He's got the whole world where? Oh, come on. That's all you got? I mean, you got to... Let's try it again. He's got the whole world. Oh my gosh. I don't think you guys believe it. It's just like, man. Anyway, but that's what we're going to see here. And when we go to school, we study history and not prophecy. Why is that? Because we live in a linear timeline, right? So everything's got a beginning and an end. God created the earth. God's going to judge the earth and enter in his new kingdom. And we live somewhere in that timeline, right? Some here, some here, some here, and where we entered it. And so our perspective is from that. We could probably at best look back and say, I have a good understanding of maybe the last 100 years. Even though we're not 100 years old, we could look back and say, hey, that's still close enough to be able to understand and whatnot. We can't really look ahead and say, I know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Because you guys don't even know what's going to happen in 5 minutes from now. Well, most of you do. You're either going to want to fall asleep, your stomach's going to grumble, you're going to say, hey, I wish this guy would just shut up and keep going, so we can get out of here. That's probably going to happen, but we can't really, predict what's going to happen. And what we need to understand is how God sees everything in history. It's the same timeline that we live in, but perspective is everything. We look at history from the timeline. God looks at the timeline from outside of it. And he sees the beginning from the end. He knows what's going on, and he can join us at any moment, at any given time in that timeline. And so as God reveals to us stuff in his word in this prophetic sense, he does it with the view of everything. Knowing the beginning from the end, knowing what we're going to experience, knowing what is going to happen. Reminding us that he sees everything. And prophecy is his way of telling us what's going to happen before it happens to encourage us to understand that he is different. The God of the Bible is different than all other gods that are out there because he knows the future. He knows what's going on. But prophecy uses a lot of imagery and figurative language when it is written. And so we will see words like the word like and as used a lot. And what you need to understand when you come to prophecy is that those words and what's being described, it's the human language straining to comprehend the supernatural. For example, you go to the book of Revelation and you read about this crazy grasshopper, right, that stings from its tail. Now, that was John 2,000 years ago trying to write about something that he had no idea what it was. And he said, hey, it looks like this. Now, I'm not saying that this is what it's going to be, but because I've seen a helicopter and I've heard them, I could say, hey, that sure sounds a lot like the description of a helicopter, especially a military helicopter that has the opportunity, the ability to shoot from the tail. So John 2,000 years ago could have been saying, hey, I see this helicopter, but it looks like a grasshopper. Because how else would you explain it? If you've never seen a helicopter, what would you say? How would you describe it, right? And so we will see a lot of this figurative language. And again, remember, it's our language straining to comprehend what God is revealing. In Daniel chapter 7, we're going to see a lot of switching between the seen and the unseen realms, the physical and the spiritual world, right? And we're going to be wondering, we're going to have a lot of questions. You may have a lot more questions after today than you did before you showed up. I hope that's not the case, but you might. You might be like, well, what is this? And how come that? And that's okay as long as it drives you to the one who has the answers, which is not me, because I will use the figurative speech. It looks a lot like that. And I'm not going to be so close-minded to say that I know exactly what all these things are. You see, if you're going to really interpret prophecy correctly, you have to come at it with what I would call open-handed and closed-fisted items, right? And what I mean is this. In the closed hand is this. We're not going to debate this. We're not going to, this is not up for discussion or anything. And here's those closed fist items. Jesus is king coming on the clouds. We don't debate that. Like, we're not going to. We can agree with that. That God knows the future and he's working all things together for good. We're not going to debate those things. The open-handed ones, the things that we can talk about, we can debate but not divide over is this. Things like, who's the beast? What's he look like? Where's he coming from? What is this horn that we're going to read about? I mean, what are the four kingdoms? Those are things that we could talk about so that we can, be like, hey, it could be this, it might not be that. But what we need to do is, as we approach, we need to realize that the goal for understanding prophecy is not so that you can win Bible trivia, that you can have some grand revelation, like this is what it is, and I've got it. And it's not so that you can make T-shirts and make money off of, some vision that is here. The point behind prophecy is not to gain knowledge, but to give you encouragement on how to live today. Because if you look at the world today, there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of things that we just don't know. But how are we encouraged to live today? Paul David Tripp says this. He says, you know what? We live between the already and the not yet. Right? The already, this is what's taken place. But the not yet, here's what's to come. We're in the middle of that. We're in the middle of a lot of God's word already fulfilled, but a lot of God's word not being fulfilled yet. And what prophecy should do is encourage us to live faithfully today by reminding us what God has already done and encouraging us that he's still working and he's not done yet. So how do I live faithfully today? And so really today's message is titled, Living Faithfully Between the Already and the Not Yet. To live faithfully between the already and not yet. And so Daniel 7 is going to show us how we can do that as we understand really three things. And we'll see this as we look at Daniel 7. Number one, that God's revelation is enough. What God has given us in his word is all we need to be able to live faithfully today. Number two, that Jesus is with you, regardless of what you're going through. And then finally, that God's truth is going to be the one thing that will sustain you through the end, right? To see you to the finish line. And so, if you would, turn to verse 1, and what we'll look at is God's revelation is enough in the first 8 verses. And we read this. It says, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and a vision of his head while on his bed. Doesn't that sound like Dr. Seuss? I mean, it's there again. I'm like, man, I just want to finish it for him, but he didn't, because he goes off. He says, then he wrote down the dream telling the main facts. So I want to pause there for a moment. Chapter 7 and 8 actually take place between chapters 4 and 5. So what chapter 7 and 8 is it's us looking back, really, at what God has already done. Something that has already taken place. But what we see here at the end of verse 1 is what Daniel did. He had this vision between verses chapters 4 and 5. He writes it down, but he only gives us the main facts. Thanks, Daniel. Like, why not give me the whole dream? Like, why didn't you tell it all to me? Like, I want it all. I need to know. But he didn't do that. He just gave us the main facts. Don't you think it would have been nice for Daniel to give us more? He didn't. Why? Well, because we didn't need him. Right? We didn't need the whole facts. God just gave us what we needed. And so the question now becomes this: how will we live knowing we don't have all the facts? Or how will we live faithfully knowing there's things out there that we don't know? Right? We don't know all that God gave Daniel. But we know he gave him enough to live faithfully. How do we know that? Look at Daniel's life. Here Daniel is a guy who was brought from his hometown into, Babylon as a captive. He was made a eunuch. He then was overlooked. He was thrown in a lion's den. His friends were thrown in a fiery furnace. He was totally rejected. He was only, brought when he could be, of use to the king. I mean, in the world's economy, his life amounted to not much. We would say poor Daniel. But as we look at Daniel's life, what we see is that he had enough to live faithfully in that time. Even though he had shattered dreams, even though it didn't make sense, even though God didn't show up in his lifetime and remove him from Babylon, he had enough to finish well and to live faithfully in between the already and the not yet. And what God said was this: I'm just going to record the main facts because that's all that we need to do the same. It goes on in verse 2. It says, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Revelation chapter 17, verse 15 tells us that the great sea is the nations of the world. The sea referring to here is probably the Mediterranean Sea. And what we will understand is that each of the empires mentioned in this dream that Daniel have a geographical connection to the Mediterranean Sea, right? And so now what we see is there's these nations that are coming out of the sea, but there's these four winds that stir up the great sea, right? Now this causes some debate as to what it is. And this is where we have the open and close. I don't know what the four winds are. And really, you can say, well, I know, come on, McFly. Okay, really. What are they then? No, we're not going to divide over that, but we will say, hey, it could be this, and we're going to discuss it. Well, we're told in Psalm 35:5 and Isaiah 41:16 that the winds are the sovereign power of God striving with men. So it's this striving that happens between man and God. Well, yeah, see, Shawn, you can tell me. Oh, yeah, but, in Revelation 7:1, we're told this, that the four winds really are the satanic forces mentioned in Revelation chapter 7. So which one is it? I don't know. Now, to say that I know would be wrong. But to say this is I can be sure of. Regardless of what it is, what we see is there's going to be this time of great turmoil, of a stirring of the seas, of the stirring of the nations, of the stirring of a people group, much like we see today. Turn on the news and what do you see? Stirring, right? Nobody's getting along, right? Nobody likes each other. There's conflict, there's strife, there's struggles, there's turmoils, there's wars, there's rumors of wars, there's all this stuff. The winds are moving. The seas are raging. And we're in the middle of it. Again, we discuss what these might be, but we don't divide over it. But how do we live faithfully in the midst of these trying times that we live in? That's the main question. It goes on in verse 3, and it says, and four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And so now we see this wind going, but now all of a sudden we see these four beasts, and we know that the four beasts are four kingdoms. There's 2 different camps on this one as well, right? Some say that this associates with the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had in chapter 2, right? The head of gold and, that one, right? Which, I will tell you, that's my belief, my personal belief. I'm not going to argue and debate it over with you. I'll let you know why I believe that, but you need to come to your own conclusion because it's secondary. Some say that these other nations here are speaking of the nations that will be around when the end times begin to take place. Again, open for discussion, not division. Now, here's why I believe that they associate with chapter 2. Archaeologists had discovered one of the gates a few years back that was there in the site of Babylon. And the symbol on that gate was a lion with wings. Interesting. Sure, fitting. I mean, like Babylon, lion with wings. Hey, what does he see? A lion with wings. Where the other camp will say, well, it's Great Britain because Great Britain was the object. Again, could I be wrong? Yes. But I don't think I am. Here's why. Keep going. So we have that. But then we have this what? The wings were plucked off the lion, and then this guy was given the heart of a man. Sounds kind of crazy, right? But it sure sounds a lot like what took place to Nebuchadnezzar when God humbled him for his arrogance, made him like a beast creature, and then kind of humbled his heart when he repented and gave him the heart of a man. Again, I see it fitting here. When he turned in faith, God gave him a new heart, and he stood on his feet. Again, discuss, not divide. It's not about winning Bible trivia. It's about him being encouraged on how to live faithfully today, right? And what do we know? That God meets us where we are. And if we repent, he will establish us as the men and women that he wants us to be. And he will use us. But it goes on in verse 5. And suddenly another beast, a second, here we get this prophetic speech, like a bear. It's not that it was a bear, but it looked like a bear, right? It was raised up on the side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, arise, devour much flesh. After this I looked, and there was another, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given it given to it. After this, I saw the night vision, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the root, and there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. Now do you understand why most people stop at chapter 6? Like, what is this? Oh, no. I mean, you come to this and you're like, dude, this guy's nuts. Why is he even reading this to me? Right? Why are we here? Welcome to my world, right? So here, the bear, what was that? Because I believe that it's following that of chapter 2, the bear would be the Medo-Persian Empire, right? This is synonymous with the arms of silver in chapter 2. What are the ribs then? Not just dinner, right? The ribs were the empires that were devoured by the Medes and Persians. There was 3 of them. 3 ribs, 3 nations. The Babylonians, the Egyptians, and the Lydians. Those 3, we know historically, were destroyed by the Medo-Persian army. Then we have this that looks like a leopard. Anybody know anything about leopards? They're pretty fast, aren't they? Swift. They just kind of come in, take over their prey, eat it, and then they're done. You know, they're like locusts. They come, they eat, they leave, right? That's just how they are. Well, that would then represent the Greeks, right? The belly of brass, where Alexander the Great was their leader. And what do we know about Alexander the Great? We know that he didn't have a big army. There was only 35,000 people in his army. But they were able to strike quick, strike fast. And they had total domination. He was so depressed after he conquered the entire New World. He was like, what am I going to do now? Like, I don't have anybody else to conquer. Because it happened so quickly. Well, he didn't even have family to pass things down to. So when he died, what happened? His kingdom was passed down to 4 generals, which would be the 4 heads that are now represented here. Right? It just fits to me too perfectly. But it was out of that we see these 10 horns, right? Which would, be synonymous with the 10 toes of Daniel chapter 2. The horns and the toes speak of the confederation of a 10-nation army that's coming out of the old Roman Empire. But out of these, we have the little horn. Well, what's this little horn? Like, that's kind of crazy. Well, I believe it's the Antichrist. What's interesting to me is people think, oh, the Antichrist, he's some ugly creature and this and that and the other. But what is the word Antichrist? It could mean against or other than, which he was both, right? This little horn. And what we see about this little horn is that there's going to be some kind of power struggle before he takes control of this 10-nation confederation. But you need to be reminded this. When the Antichrist shows up, he's not going to be what you think he is, right? How many of you have the picture of the Antichrist as the guy in the black in the cartoons with the mustache that he always curls? That's what I picture, right? I'm dating myself now, but he's out there, That's not it at all, right? He's not going to have a black cape twirling his mustache. Actually, from the human perspective, he's going to be beautiful. He's going to be attractive. He's going to be a great orator. He's going to be something and someone that people want to follow. But not everybody's going to jump on the bandwagon right away. We know that there's going to be some resistance. We're told that 3 are going to resist initially, but then they'll be overtaken ultimately. So now we have this dream. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what do we do if we had this dream? What would you think? Would you tell anybody? No, you wouldn't. Why? Because they're going to think you're crazy. Like, that's nuts. What do you take? That's ridiculous. You would definitely not say, you know what, God gave me a dream, and then tell him this one. Would you? Probably not. Here's where we need to really wrap our head around prophecy. Why do we have prophecy? Again, it's not just so that we have knowledge, but so that we would be encouraged to live faithfully today. So some way, shape, or form, Daniel would have been encouraged at this point with this dream. It would have brought him some encouragement. And we should find some encouragement in what Daniel wrote down for us, even though we don't know the whole thing, even though we don't have the whole dream revealed to us, we should be encouraged. And we should know that what we have here is enough to encourage us to walk faithfully and to trust God's revelation is enough. To trust that what he revealed is enough for us to do that. You see, you trust God when you say this, God, you've given me enough. You've revealed to me enough in your word to be able to live faithfully today. But then you add to it by praying this, God, give me the faith to trust you with what I don't know. Right? There's a lot we don't know that's going on in the world around us. And we need the faith to trust God that he's going to get us through what we don't understand. Daniel is a perfect example of that. Daniel lived a faithful life his entire life. He didn't get what he hoped for, but God was faithful to him, and he was faithful to God. And God strengthened him and encouraged him, and he used this vision to be what encouraged him. The vision of what's to come when this new kingdom is established. So the second thing that we're going to see that will encourage us to live faithfully and to walk faithfully in between, the already and not yet is this. Jesus is with us. Verse 9, it says, I watched till thrones were put in place and the Ancient of Days was seated. His garment was white as snow and the hair on his head was like pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame, its wheels a burning fire. A fiery stream issued that came forth from before him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. I watched then because the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking. I watched till the beast was slain and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As for the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away and their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I was watching in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Then to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom the one which shall not be destroyed. Close hand, right? Here we have it. God, he is the Ancient of Days. So in the midst of Daniel's confusion, what is revealed to him in his vision? That God, the Ancient of Days, the God of the Bible, shows up. And he's establishing his judgment on the nations. The nations that brought him into captivity will one day be judged for their decisions and their actions, that his life will be vindicated, right? That God is going to judge this Antichrist. Notice it's God doing the judging. But God's judgment is issued here. The other thing that's in the closed hand is this one like the Son of Man coming on the clouds. That is Jesus. Jesus is coming. Close hand. We don't argue that. God will judge and Jesus is coming, guys. That's our hope. You see, when we live with the reality that God is coming to judge, or God will judge and Jesus is coming, and that could be at any moment of any given day, we will tend to live more faithfully, don't you think? Like if we really believed that Jesus was coming today, we probably would change what we have on our schedule. I'm just saying. We would probably view things differently. And if we really cared about people and we knew that his judgment was coming, we would probably make sure we took the most opportunities that we could to share the hope that we have of Jesus Christ with the people that we cared the most about. We wouldn't say, oh, I'll do that later. Or, I think maybe I should just invite him to church because I don't know if I could do it. Well, could you imagine if you brought somebody new to church today? They'd be like, what did you just bring me to? This guy's nuts. He really believes what he's talking about. But this is actually happening. It would change the way we think. Think about the people who were taken in captivity with Daniel. How would you feel if you were in their sandals? God's left me here, but now you have this vision, and you have a vision of the Ancient of Days seated, right? Making a judgment. This would have been a great comfort for the Jews taken in captivity. Knowing that the kingdom that they're in wasn't one that was going to last forever. That when God establishes his kingdom on earth, that they would be a part of that. And they'll be ruling and reigning with God, the Ancient of Days, for all of eternity. They'll be set free from the world system. They will be set free from their bondage and their disappointments and their failures and the turmoil. Knowing that a kingdom not of men but of God was coming, one that would never end. There would be great comfort in that for them. But verse 15 goes on. It says, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit with my body, and the vision of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him the truth of all of this. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four kings, which arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. Think about that one. You see, when circumstances leave you grieved, when uncertainties have you troubled, what do? You look at what God has made known to you. What has God revealed to you in his word? How has he showed you that he is with you? You go back to verses like verse 12, and what you will see, you find great comfort in knowing that though not everybody was destroyed at that point, that there is a time and season for everything. That the world as we know it isn't going to last forever like this. But there's a time and season. And because of that, knowing that, because you're encouraged by that, you will then live faithfully in between the already and the not yet. How? Because you can look back and see what is fulfilled, but you could also look forward and see what is coming, and you can be encouraged to keep going and not give up. Far too many people throw in the towel far too early. God, I don't like what's going on. I'm just giving up. God's saying, no, I've given you enough. I am with you in the midst of this. You see, what you would then do is when you look back, you're like, hey, God's doing something. And then you look ahead and you're like, hey, it's coming. And then you look up. And what do you see? You see the Son of Man coming, what? On the clouds or with the clouds? With. I used to think he was coming on the clouds. That's why every time I'd fly, I'd be like, hey, God's coming on one of those. But then I realized, no, it says he's coming with the clouds. And what does that do? That brings me great encouragement. Why? Because I think of Romans chapter 12. Romans 11, that great cloud of witnesses. Those people, those saints that have gone before us. Our friends, our family who have died in the, and are now in heaven. I think of the people that we've lost that just from our church that are now, in heaven with God. That when he comes back, he's bringing them. It's a family reunion. It's a gathering together. It's a good thing. It's beautiful. You see, if we simply look at prophecy as a way to gain knowledge, we lose sight of what it was all about. And what it's about is that we would be encouraged that God is still working. And then what happens is if we're just trying to find knowledge, what do we tend to do? We tend to look around and ask ourselves this question: who's the horn? What's the horn? What's the beast? Where's the, then we get to Revelation. What's this big grasshopper? What's the, who's the whore of Babylon? Who is this? And we start to look for this and we miss what it's about. Do you want to know what the book of Revelation is about? Start by just thinking about the name. It's the book of Revelation, singular. So for those of you who say, are we going to ever study the book of Revelations? I will always answer you and say no, because there's no such book. And we have studied the book of Revelation. Because if you move forward, what does it say? It's the revelation of Jesus Christ. And so when we come to the book of Revelation, we're not to look for the beast or the Antichrist or the this or the that or the other. We're to look to and for Jesus. What did Daniel see when he looked up? What was revealed to Daniel? What is all we need to live faithfully in the world that we live in? The Ancient of Days, God the Father, the Son of Man who is coming with the clouds. We can discuss the other stuff, but what we need, what is essential, or that is that. What will encourage us is an understanding of who God is, the heart of God, how he judges sin, but yet he loves humanity. Who took a king and humbled him. And when that king repented, he established him with a testimony of God's faithfulness. We need to understand a God who would show up in human history in the life of a man who was ripped from his hometown, caused to become a slave, who was neglected and forgotten and abused and just shattered dreams and everything, but yet God shows up in a vision like this to let him know, I'm not done with you, and I love you. And what you need to continue to live faithfully, Daniel, is to have an understanding of who God is, the Ancient of Days, and who the Son of Man is, and how he is there with you. But the third thing that we need to understand, if we're going to walk faithfully, is that it's God's truth that's going to sustain us. And I'll tell you what, in our day and age, there's a lot that will fight for what truth is, right? There's a lot of stuff that will even question truth. Is there even truth out there? What is truth, right? But in verse 19 through 28, we're going to see God's truth will be that which sustains us. It says, then I wish to know the truth. Daniel wished to know the truth, which is good. I wish to know the truth about the four beasts, which was the fourth beast, which was different from all others, exceedingly dreadful, with its teeth of iron and its nails of bronze, which devoured broken pieces and trampled the residue with his feet. And the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up, before which 3 fell, namely that horn which had eyes and a mouth, which spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater than his fellows. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them, until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. Daniel wanted more information. That's okay. It's okay to want more, but where are you seeking to get that? Right? He went to God. Here, he asked, what is it, And I'm not sure that he got the answer he wanted. Right? But he got the answer he needed. Right? Who's the horn? What's the horn? That's not answered. We don't know who it is. But what we're told is the Ancient of Days came. You see, the answer that he needed was, again, not who the horn was, but who God is. Who God is and what is he doing? What do we know? This beast, he was brutal. Seemed to be prevailing, right? Turn on the news, you'd think the enemy is winning. Many Christians have thrown in the towel because what use is it? Why should I fight? I'm just giving up. I'm done. It's because we've lost sight. We didn't get the answer we wanted, but yet we've got the answer we needed, and that is this. God is still in control. God is still in charge. God is still working. God is still faithful. Jesus is still king and still rules over a kingdom, and that kingdom is coming. You see, so when you think you have lost everything, remember this. The Ancient of Days is coming, and you know what? He is for you. He's for you. Think about it. The God who created everything is for you. I love that. He's for you. God is for you. He loves you. He cares about you. But it goes on. It says, thus he said, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, trample it and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise. The first shall arise from this kingdom, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and laws. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, and times and half a time. But the court shall be seated, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me, and my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. This really messed with him, right? A fourth kingdom, or I would believe the Roman kingdom, one of the little horns, right? The Antichrist comes up. Such a great orator that everybody follows him. Man. But really the question I have is not who is the Antichrist, how is he going to come up, but who are the saints? Who are the saints here? That one's kind of important to me because I know that the Bible says that once you're saved, you're a saint. Not like St. Paul or anything like that, but just we're saints. We're a kingdom of priests. That's what the Bible says. So does this mean, since this is speaking about the end times and the end of the world, right before God's judgment, right? The second coming of Christ, where God's judgment takes place, does that mean that I'm going to have to go through this time? And am I going to experience this hardship? What's going to happen? Who are these saints? Well, this is where the book of Daniel connects to the book of Revelation, right? Where you see what we call the rapture of the church. You see the tribulation, a 7-year period that starts the first half, the first 3.5 years. Interesting, because we come to 3.5 years here, right? Peace and safety, everything is going okay. And then all of a sudden the Antichrist rises up and he's like, hey, no, you need to worship me as God. He establishes himself as God in the temple. He, desecrates the temple, demands to be worshiped. When people don't, then, literally all hell breaks loose. There's torment, there's persecution, and all this stuff that takes place for the next 3.5 years. That's where we are here. So who are these saints? I believe in the rapture of the church. You would say, well, the word rapture is not in the Bible. Great, you know that too. But no, the word Trinity is not in the Bible either. But do you want to argue that we serve a triune God? The concept of rapture is in there. Enoch walked with God and was not. He was taken up. The word rapture just means to be caught up. How is it going to work? I don't know. When's it going to happen? To be honest with you, we can debate. There's people on all sides. There's 3 teams on that one. Pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. Which one is it? Is he coming before the Great Tribulation? Is he coming at the 3.5 years, or is he coming in the end? I think it's kind of an important thing to kind of look at because it would encourage us, right? Where do I live? And here's the answer. I really don't know. I can tell you what I believe, though, because I have great friends that are on different teams on this one than me, right? But here's what I believe. I believe in a pre-trib rapture. I believe God's going to come for his church, right? The church which is made up of Jews and Gentiles, the bride of Christ, take us up before this takes place. And you're like, well, can you prove it? If you give me about 12 more hours, we can sit down and we can have a great discussion of this. And I'm not going to tell you that, but if you want to know why I believe this, think about it like this. When the church is raptured up, caught up, and we're there in heaven, we're called to be to the marriage feast of the Lamb. And so I believe if you really want to understand the rapture of the church and when it's going to take place, you need to understand a Jewish wedding. And again, that would take a long time to play out for you. But I will give you one book that I highly recommend, and it's called The Best Days of Forever by J. McCarl. I would encourage you to read that, and it'll give you an understanding of this. But my point is this. I can't tell you exactly when it's going to take place, but I believe it will. And what you need to know is this. You need to live your life today as if it could be today. Right? If God's coming back for his bride, you want to be ready, don't you? Now, I've performed numerous weddings, and I will tell you the one thing that is common in all of them. The bride is always ready for her wedding. The groom, on the other hand, not necessarily, right? The bride, she makes sure she's ready, and she doesn't come out until she's ready, right? Be ready. Well, what is it, pre, mid, post? I believe it's the pre. That's where I get my encouragement from. I get that from studying Jewish weddings and other things. Like when you look at the book of Revelation, you got the first 3 chapters talking about the church. Then after that, the church is not mentioned again until the end of the book. So if the church isn't there, where is it? But yet we have these saints. Who are they? These tribulation saints are those who put their faith in Jesus in the middle of the tribulation, saying this, that regardless of what the turmoil is, people are still getting saved. That's the hope that we have. They're taken to this, wilderness place, most likely the city of Petra, right? There's a war, things are going on. But we have this prophecy. We have enough given to us to live faithfully today. And, I love that our founding fathers inscribed scripture on buildings, but sometimes they didn't get it completely right. Now, I've never seen the building, so I'm just trusting the people that I've read this from. But apparently on the United Nations building in New York, these words are written, and they're written from Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. It says this, "And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Speaking of peace. The problem I have is they only give half the information. You see, the first part of that verse says this, the part that they left out, "And he shall judge among the nations and shall rebuke many people." God's judgment comes before peace, right? God showing up is what brings peace. See, the fact that, what they left out, what our government left out is how we get peace is not to have the absence of conflict, but having the presence of God in our midst. Right? God has to be there. And what we see is this, and you would probably agree, but man's attempt at government is beastly at best. Right? Well, why do I say that? Well, what does a beast do? Have you ever thought about that? They anger easily, right? They guard their territory, and they shed blood. It kind of fits. Look at the governments out there. Right? That's what happens. I've never seen a bear start a "let's save the bunnies" program. Just doesn't happen. No, they eat the bunnies. Bunny is lunch or a snack. But in the midst of all of this, in the midst of this chaos that we find ourselves in, what do we see? The Ancient of Days is coming with a kingdom and a king that is right, beautiful, and true. What we know as a king and a kingdom is not what God's kingdom is going to be like. You see, when Daniel saw the world history from God's perspective, he was troubled, right? And what did he do? He kept the matter in his heart, showing us this, that if we want to walk faithfully in between the already and not yet, what you need to do is know God's truth will be that which sustains you. And that truth is this: regardless of the turmoil in the world, regardless of the chaos that we experience, regardless of the disappointments like Daniel felt, God is still for you. He still shows up, he still loves you, and he still has a message, and he's not done working. You see, what you will understand is this: it's a person, not a program, that'll bring peace. And we're very good at programs, especially in the church. We have all kinds of programs for everything. If you just come to this program or you just go to this program, you'll experience peace. And, that's half a verse. What I'll tell you this: if you want to experience peace, it's not in a program, it's in a person. It's in the person and work of Jesus Christ. He is the Prince of Peace. And peace isn't the absence of conflicts, it's the presence of Jesus in your life in the midst of conflict, much like we see in Daniel. So may we be those who Jesus said, when you see these things begin to take place, what was he speaking of? The signs of the times, wars and rumors of wars. He says two things to us. He says, what I want you to do is straighten up and look up, for your redemption draws near. You see, if we just come to prophecy to win Bible trivia, we miss Jesus. We may know who the horn is. We may know who the Antichrist is. We may even know what the grasshopper is. But we missed it because we wouldn't know who Jesus is. So if you want to walk faithful in between the already and not yet, don't look around, but look within and say, hey, is the Prince of Peace ruling and reigning in my heart and in my life? Asking Jesus to take his truth and plant it deep in your heart every day. And as he does, look up with an anticipation that today is the day that he could return, knowing that he has given you enough of the revelation to walk faithfully, knowing that Jesus is enough to get you through tough times and uncertainties because he loves you. So as we close Daniel 7, maybe you didn't get the answers you were hoping for, but hopefully you see the answer that you need. And that is this: that God's revelation is enough. It's all you need, because it reveals to you that Jesus is with you and that his word will sustain you even in the trying times that we face.